The discussion begins with a reaction to the unexpected timing of the court verdict involving Prince Harry. Although it had been anticipated that a decision would take several months, the ruling arrived much sooner than expected, coinciding with Harry's visit to UK, where he was expected to promote the Invictus Games. What was intended to be a redemption tour has instead been overshadowed by a major legal setback. According to the commentators, the verdict represents a significant blow not only to Harry's ego, but also to his broader plans for rebuilding his public image over the coming days. The conversation then shifts to the growing list of controversies surrounding Prince Harry's charitable work. The commentators point out that he has lost control of Senebale, the charity he co-founded, and is now facing a defamation lawsuit brought by the organization itself. They also mention concerns surrounding African parks, where Harry serves on the board, noting allegations involving the abuse of indigenous African communities. In addition, they claim that the Archwell Foundation has largely ceased its charitable activities, while the Invictus Games have reportedly been losing sponsors. Against this backdrop, they argue that the latest court defeat further damages Harry's already struggling reputation. The commentators suggest that Prince Harry has spent the past 6 to 12 months attempting to reshape himself into a more serious public figure. They reference his visit to Ukraine, his public criticism of political leaders, including President Trump and President Putin, and his article addressing anti-Semitism in the UK as examples of this effort. However, they argue that the judge's assessment of Harry as an unreliable or less than credible witness seriously undermines that objective. They also remark that public perception of Harry continues to be influenced by personal revelations in his memoir, making it difficult, in their opinion, for many people to view him as a serious statesman. According to the discussion, credibility is especially important for Harry's commercial future. They argue that high-paying speaking engagements and public appearances depend on audiences believing in the image he presents. The commentators also suggest that strengthening his public reputation could support his long-running campaign for enhanced security protection, particularly by reinforcing the idea that he remains a high-profile figure facing exceptional risks. In their view, the court ruling weakens the image he has been carefully building over the past year. The conversation then turns to Harry's ongoing security dispute. The commentators argue that after failing to regain armed police protection during his UK visit, it is increasingly unlikely that such protection will ever be restored. They speculate that the disappointing outcome of the trip may discourage him from returning to Britain frequently. In their view, Harry failed to achieve any of the objectives he may have hoped for, including a meeting with King Charles, the possibility of bringing his children to UK, positive media coverage, and a legal victory. Instead of the expected uplifting images from charity events and the Invictus Games, they believe the trip has become defined by disappointment and defeat. The discussion also touches on Meghan Markle, with one commentator arguing that any future return to UK would, in their opinion, signal a need for support after professional setbacks rather than a triumphant comeback. They suggest that hopes for positive headlines celebrating a warm reunion between Meghan and King Charles are now highly unlikely to materialize. Finally, the commentators discuss the dispute over accommodation during Harry's visit. They explain that Buckingham Palace reportedly offered Harry a royal residence several months in advance, describing the offer as generous. According to their account, Harry initially declined the offer before later changing his mind, allegedly after a security team advised him that Buckingham Palace would be the safest place for him to stay in London. However, by the time he attempted to accept the invitation, palace officials reportedly informed him that it was too late, explaining that arranging accommodation within a royal residence requires extensive advanced planning and security preparations. The commentators continue by discussing why Buckingham Palace was unable to accommodate Prince Harry after he reportedly changed his mind. They explain that Buckingham Palace is not simply a residence that can be prepared at short notice, as much of it functions as offices and is currently undergoing construction. Preparing for a royal guest will require extensive planning, including arranging hospitality services, chefs, food and beverages, accommodation staff, and additional security personnel. They argue that the palace had initially been preparing for Harry, Meghan, their children, and their entourage, only for Harry to later indicate that he would be traveling alone. In their view, such last-minute changes would have wasted significant resources and created unnecessary logistical and security challenges. The discussion then turns to Harry's attitude, with the commentators claiming that the incident reflects a sense of entitlement and an expectation that plans can simply be changed at his convenience. They argue that Harry still believes King Charles can intervene whenever necessary, but that the king has repeatedly demonstrated his commitment to acting fairly and within constitutional boundaries. According to the commentators, King Charles has consistently refused to use his position to secure special treatment for his son, whether in relation to security arrangements or legal matters. They even suggest that the king had previously advised Harry not to pursue legal action against the Daily Mail, a decision they believe has ultimately left Harry embarrassed, while his father has wisely remained distant from the ongoing controversy. The conversation then shifts to how Meghan Markle may respond to Harry's latest legal defeat. The commentators note that this is not Harry's first setback, recalling that in early 2024 he withdrew a previous legal action concerning his security arrangements and was reportedly ordered to pay substantial legal costs. They speculate that the couple's planned visit to the UK may have been intended to portray Harry and Meghan as victims while casting King Charles in a negative light. In their opinion, the couple have built much of their public narrative around victimhood over the past several years. One commentator argues that if Meghan had genuinely planned to appear alongside Harry, she likely would have done so only in the event of a legal victory. Because Harry lost the case, they speculate that Meghan may now choose to stay away from the public spotlight. They point to previous occasions, including promotion of Harry's memoir Spare, his legal battles, and his controversial BBC interview, claiming that Meghan has often remained absent whenever Harry has faced public criticism. Based on that pattern, they predict that despite speculation about a possible appearance, she is unlikely to join him during this visit. The discussion becomes more critical of Meghan's ambitions and Harry's current public standing. The commentators argue that Meghan remains focused on securing business opportunities, promoting products, and pursuing commercial partnerships, while Harry continues trying to position himself as a global humanitarian and influential public figure. However, they question whether he still has the credibility needed to influence audiences or attract significant speaking opportunities following his recent setbacks. Finally, the commentators discuss the so-called Project Thaw theory, which suggests that Harry may be attempting to rebuild his relationship with the royal family. They argue that Harry has increasingly echoed themes and causes championed by King Charles, including international affairs and campaigns against anti-Semitism. Rather than viewing this as evidence of reconciliation, they suggest that Harry is simply aligning himself more closely with the king's public agenda in an effort to maintain the impression that a royal reconciliation remains possible. In their opinion, this strategy allows Harry and Meghan to continue benefiting from their royal connections despite years of public criticism directed at the royal family. The segment concludes with speculation about Harry's current state of mind, with the commentators wondering how he must be feeling after what they describe as a deeply disappointing visit to the United Kingdom. The discussion concludes with speculation about Prince Harry's emotional state following his latest court defeat. One commentator believes Harry is likely feeling extremely angry rather than humbled, arguing that the judgment should have prompted him to reconsider his approach to constant legal battles and public disputes. They suggest he should ask himself whether every negative headline or article deserves a courtroom response, particularly when many of the issues relate to events that occurred more than a decade ago. The commentators then question why Meghan Markle became part of Harry's courtroom testimony, when much of the case concerned media coverage from approximately 15 years earlier. They note that Harry spoke about the impact those articles allegedly had on his past relationship with Chelsea Davy, suggesting that the media contributed to the breakdown of that relationship. One commentator argues that if they were Meghan, they would find those comments uncomfortable, comparing the situation to Meghan publicly discussing her former husband, Trevor Engelson, during an interview. In their view, repeatedly referencing a former romantic relationship is not a positive reflection on a current marriage. The conversation then shifts to the challenges facing the Invictus Games. The commentators argue that Harry's recent legal troubles have forced the organization into damage control mode at a time when attention should have been focused on veterans. They claim to have heard that some within the organization's leadership had already expressed concerns about Meghan's involvement months earlier. Referring to previous reporting and commentary, they argue that Harry and Meghan's public image has become increasingly controversial and speculate that behind-the-scenes discussions are taking place about the impact this has had on the Invictus Games. The commentators also reference claims made in Tom Bower's book, arguing that Harry and Meghan's public profile allegedly harmed fundraising efforts for Senate bail, with some corporate sponsors reportedly distancing themselves from the charity. They suggest that a similar pattern may now be affecting the Invictus Games, claiming that media attention often shifts toward Meghan's fashion choices and public appearances rather than the wounded veterans the event is intended to honor. In their opinion, the veterans deserve to remain the central focus instead of being overshadowed by celebrity coverage. The discussion concludes by examining the future of Harry and Meghan's marriage. While Tom Bauer has publicly suggested that the couple share a strong and genuine bond despite their critics, one commentator expresses skepticism. They speculate that Harry would be unlikely to leave the marriage, whereas Meghan might be more willing to do so under certain circumstances. The conversation also touches on California divorce laws, with the commentator suggesting that the length of marriage could have financial implications, although this is presented as speculation rather than fact. Finally, the commentators argue that repeated professional disappointments can place enormous pressure on any relationship. They suggest that setbacks involving major projects and commercial partnerships inevitably affect life behind closed doors. In their view, because Harry and Meghan have built much of their public identity around high-profile business ventures, media projects, and commercial success, repeated setbacks in those areas are likely to create additional strain within the relationship itself. The discussion concludes with the argument that Harry and Meghan's professional setbacks are rooted in what the commentators see as a lack of authenticity. They claim that many of the couple's major projects and business ventures have failed to resonate with the public because the image they attempted to present did not align with how audiences perceive them. According to the commentators, repeated disappointments involving high-profile partnerships and media projects are likely creating difficulties behind the scenes, as professional failures inevitably place pressure on personal relationships. The host then praises royal commentator Kinsey Schofield for what he describes as her willingness to speak candidly about the royal family and the Sussexes. The conversation briefly turns to speculation surrounding California family law, with the commentators noting that Harry and Meghan married in 2018 and settled in California by the end of 2020 after temporarily staying at Tyler Perry's home. They jokingly speculate about whether the timing of those milestones could become significant in the future, although the discussion remains entirely hypothetical. The focus then shifts to whether King Charles is likely to meet Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet during Harry's visit to United Kingdom. One commentator says they believe such a meeting is unlikely, arguing that if it had genuinely been planned, suitable accommodation for the family would already have been arranged at Buckingham Palace. They note that it has been several years since the king last saw his grandchildren and acknowledge that, given his age and ongoing cancer treatment, time is especially valuable. The commentators then question Harry and Meghan's motivations for seeking a relationship between their children and King Charles while, in their view, maintaining little contact with Meghan's father, Thomas Markle. They argue that if the couple's actions were motivated solely by compassion and family reconciliation, similar efforts would have been made to rebuild that relationship as well. Instead, they claim that maintaining close ties to the British royal family offers significant public and commercial value. They also criticize the decision to use royal titles for Archie and Lilibet while the children are being raised in the United States, arguing that the continued emphasis on royal status reflects a desire to preserve the prestige and influence associated with the monarchy rather than a purely family-centered objective. The interview concludes with the host encouraging viewers to follow Kinsey Schofield's YouTube channel for further royal commentary before thanking her for joining the program. The conversation ends on a light-hearted note as the host jokes about her energetic appearance during the interview, contrasting it with what the commentators speculate is Prince Harry's disappointment following his latest legal defeat.